The restaurant fell silent the moment she said it. "Sorry, I brought my cat." Her voice barely a whisper, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. A gray cat sat in a canvas bag at her feet, too thin, too still, watching the man across the table with the wariness of something that had been abandoned before. The single dad didn't move. His hand stayed wrapped around his water glass, knuckles white. She waited for what always came next, the polite excuse, the tight smile, the scrape of a chair pushing back. 7 blind dates. 7 times she had watched men walk away from her and her too much. But this time, something shifted. He leaned forward instead of back. And what he did next would unravel everything she thought she knew about love, about second chances, and about the quiet courage it takes to stay when everyone else leaves. Daniel Brooks arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, which was unlike him. He was a man who measured time carefully, who showed up exactly when he was supposed to, not a minute before or after. But tonight was different. Tonight, his hands wouldn't stop trembling, and his chest felt tight with something that might have been anticipation or might have been dread. He sat at a corner table near the window, fingers drumming against the white tablecloth, watching the door like a man waiting for a verdict he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. The restaurant was nicer than anywhere he'd been in years. White linens draped over small round tables, candles flickering in glass holders that threw dancing shadows across the walls, soft jazz bleeding from hidden speakers like honey dripping into the air. His sister had picked this place. She had picked everything about tonight, from the restaurant to the time to the woman he was supposed to meet. She had shown him a photograph, a woman with dark hair and careful eyes, a smile that didn't quite reach all the way. "Her name is Paige," his sister had said. "She's an accountant, quiet but kind. I think you'd like her." Daniel had looked at the photograph and felt nothing. That was the problem, really. He hadn't felt much of anything in 5 years. 5 years since Margaret died. 5 years since he had stood in a hospital room, holding his wife's hand, watching the machines beep slower and slower until they didn't beep at all. 5 years since he had walked out of that room, a different man, hollowed out, emptied of everything except the weight of what he had lost. Cancer, the doctor said. The kind that moves fast and takes everything. 1 month she was laughing in the kitchen, dancing to old songs on the radio while making pancakes for Rosie. The next month, she was in hospice, and Daniel was learning words like palliative care and comfort measures, and it won't be long now. The first year after her death was a blur. Daniel moved through days like a ghost, eating without tasting, sleeping without resting, waking each morning with the same heavy stone of grief sitting on his chest. The only thing that kept him tethered to the world was Rosie, his daughter. 2 years old when her mother died, too young to understand, old enough to feel the absence. She would toddle into his room in the middle of the night, clutching the teddy bear Margaret had given her, and crawl into his bed without a word. They would lie there together in the darkness, 2 broken people clinging to each other, and Daniel would make silent promises he wasn't sure he could keep. He learned to braid hair from YouTube videos, his thick carpenter's fingers fumbling with elastic bands and tiny clips while Rosie sat patient and still. He learned to cook meals that weren't burned, to remember library book and dentist appointments and which friends were having birthday parties. He learned to be both father and mother, though he knew, in the quiet hours of the night, when Rosie was asleep and the house was too silent, that he would never fill the space Margaret had left. That space belonged to her, and it always would. Before he walked out the door tonight, Rosie had grabbed his hand. She was 7 now, all skinny legs and tangled hair, and a wisdom that sometimes startled him. She had her mother's eyes, That same warm brown. That same way of looking at you, like she could see straight through to your soul. "Daddy," she said, her voice serious in a way that made her sound decades older than 7. "If she's nice, don't run away, okay?" Daniel had knelt down to her level, looking into those eyes that were so achingly familiar. "What makes you think I would run away?" Rosie had tilted her head, considering. "Because you always do. Auntie says you're scared of getting hurt again." She paused. "But Daddy, it's okay to be scared. You just can't let being scared make you miss the good stuff." Daniel had stared at his daughter, struck wordless by her casual profundity. When had she become so wise? When had she grown from the toddler who used to call for her mama in the night to this small, fierce person who could see his fear and name it so clearly? He had kissed her forehead and promised nothing, but the words stayed with him, rattling around his chest like stones as he drove to the restaurant. "Don't run away," as if she knew something he didn't, as if she could see the fear he hid behind his steady carpenter's hands and his quiet, careful life. Now, sitting at the table, he checked his watch again. 3 minutes until their scheduled meeting time. His water glass was sweating, leaving a ring on the tablecloth. He straightened his collar, then unstraightened it. He had worn a blue button-down shirt that his sister said brought out his eyes, tucked into dark jeans that were the nicest pair he owned. He felt like an imposter. He felt like a man playing dress-up, pretending to be someone who went on dates and made small talk and imagined futures that included someone other than his daughter. The door opened. A woman stepped inside, and Daniel knew immediately it was her. Not because she matched the photograph his sister had shown him, though she did, mostly, but because of the way she moved. Careful, guarded, like someone who had learned to expect disappointment and had arranged her body accordingly. She wore a simple blue dress that fell just below her knees, her dark hair pulled back in a way that was practical rather than stylish. But what caught his attention was the canvas bag she carried against her chest, cradled carefully with both hands, as if it contained something precious. She scanned the room, her eyes finding his, and he saw the flicker of recognition, followed by something else. Fear, maybe, or resignation. The look of someone steeling themselves for impact. She walked toward him, her steps measured and deliberate, and he noticed that she held the bag oddly, one hand underneath, supporting a weight, while the other pressed it against her body protectively. When she reached the table, she hesitated. Her eyes darted from his face to the empty chair across from him, then to the bag in her arms. A small muscle in her jaw twitched. Then, with what seemed like enormous effort, she sat down. She placed the bag gently on the floor beside her chair, positioning it where she could see it, where she could reach it quickly if she needed to. Her movements were careful and practiced, like someone who had done this many times before and had learned to expect certain reactions. Before Daniel could even form a greeting, before he could remember the small talk he had rehearsed on the drive over, a sound came from the bag. Small, soft, unmistakable. A meow. The woman's face went pale. She closed her eyes for a moment, and Daniel watched her chest rise and fall with a deep breath. When she opened her eyes again, they were bright with something that looked like shame, bright and wet and braced for rejection. Her hands came up to the table, but she didn't reach for the menu or the water glass or any of the normal things people reached for on first dates. Instead, her fingers twisted together, knuckles white, holding on to each other like they were the only solid thing in a tilting world. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I brought my cat." Daniel looked at her. Then he looked at the bag. Through the mesh panel on the side, he could see a pair of green eyes staring back at him. Wary, watchful, unblinking. The cat was gray, its fur thin and dull in patches. its body too small for what it should be. It looked like something that had been through a war and was still waiting for the next attack. It looked like something that had been abandoned before and expected to be abandoned again. Paige spoke quickly, the words tumbling out like she had rehearsed them 100 times in the mirror, preparing for this exact moment. She just had surgery 3 days ago. A tumor. They removed it, but she can't be alone yet. She gets anxious when I leave. She stops eating. She hides. She cries. I know this is strange. I know this is probably the weirdest thing anyone has ever done on a first date. I know you're probably thinking I'm crazy, and I completely, totally understand if you want to leave. She paused, swallowed hard. Everyone does. She said those last 2 words like a fact, like a law of physics, like gravity, or entropy, or the certainty that the sun would rise tomorrow and set tomorrow night. Everyone does. Daniel watched her face as she spoke. He saw the tension in her jaw, the way her hands gripped each other on the table until the knuckles went white, the rapid rise and fall of her chest as she breathed too fast and too shallow. He saw the redness at the corners of her eyes, held back by sheer force of will. He saw a woman who had been judged so many times that she had started judging herself first, just to beat everyone to the punch. A woman who had learned to apologize for her own existence, to preemptively excuse herself from every room she entered, to expect rejection so thoroughly that she had stopped hoping for anything else. And something in his chest shifted, something that had been locked away for 5 years, buried under grief and fear and the careful routines of a man who had decided that being alone was safer than being hurt again. He thought of Rosie, the way she slept with that teddy bear every single night, the one Margaret had given her 3 weeks before she died, pressing it into Rosie's tiny hands and whispering something Daniel couldn't hear. That bear was old now, 5 years of love having worn its fur down to bare patches. One eye had fallen off and been replaced with a mismatched button. Its stuffing had shifted, making it lumpy and lopsided. But to Rosie, it was everything. It was connection. It was love that had outlasted death. She talked to it sometimes, when she thought Daniel couldn't hear. She whispered secrets to it, confessions and fears and wishes that she wasn't ready to share with anyone else. That bear wasn't just a toy. It was a piece of her mother, carried forward into a world that no longer contained her. And this cat, this thin, scared, sick little cat in a canvas bag, was Paige's version of the same thing. A piece of something she loved too much to leave behind, even when leaving it behind would make her life easier. "What's her name?" Daniel asked. Paige blinked. The question clearly wasn't what she had expected. Her rehearsed defenses had no answer for it. "What?" "Your cat," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "What's her name?" For a long moment, she just stared at him, her mouth slightly open, her eyes searching his face for the catch, for the joke, for the moment when he would laugh and stand up and leave like all the others. But Daniel just waited, his expression patient, his hands still wrapped around his water glass. "Oatmeal," she said finally, her voice small. "Her name is Oatmeal." Daniel nodded, as if this were the most reasonable answer in the world. He raised his hand and caught the attention of a passing waiter. "Can we get a small bowl of warm milk, please?" he asked. "Just slightly warm, not hot." The waiter looked confused but professional. "Of course, sir." He disappeared toward the kitchen. Paige was staring at Daniel like he had just performed a magic trick, like he had pulled a rabbit from a hat, or made a coin vanish, or done something equally impossible and inexplicable. Her hands had loosened their death grip on each other. Her shoulders had dropped a fraction of an inch, but her eyes were still wide, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I get it," Daniel said quietly. "When you're responsible for something that depends on you, Something that needs you, that trusts you, that has no one else in the world. You don't just leave it behind. You can't." Paige didn't say anything, but he saw her throat move as she swallowed. He saw her eyes grow even brighter, the tears she was fighting getting closer to the surface, and he saw something else too, something that might have been hope, trying to push its way up through years of disappointment. The waiter returned with a small ceramic bowl of milk, steam rising gently from its surface. He placed it on the table with a puzzled look, but Daniel just thanked him and waited until he was gone. Then, carefully, he picked up the bowl and lowered it to the floor, placing it near the canvas bag. He heard a rustle, then the soft sound of a tongue lapping at liquid. When he straightened up, Paige was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Her eyes were fixed on his face, studying him like he was a puzzle she was trying to solve, a code she was trying to crack. "You're not leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. It was almost an accusation, like she couldn't quite believe it, like she needed to say it out loud to make it real. "I'm not leaving," she laughed then, a short, surprised sound that was half breath and half sob. It caught in her throat and came out wet and strange and somehow beautiful. "You're the first one," she said. 7 blind dates in 2 years. 7 times I've sat across from someone and watched them realize that I come with complications. 7 times I've watched them make excuses and leave." She shook her head, a strand of dark hair falling loose from her careful arrangement. "You're the first one who didn't stand up and walk out the door." Daniel thought about that. 7 times she had gotten dressed up, probably in this same blue dress or one like it. 7 times she had walked into a restaurant or a coffee shop or wherever these dates had happened, carrying hope in one hand and oatmeal in the other. 7 times she had watched that hope die in someone's eyes, watched them calculate the cost of being with her and decide it was too high. And still she kept trying. Still she showed up, again and again, carrying her wounded animal and her wounded heart, willing to be rejected one more time on the chance that this time might be different. That kind of persistence wasn't crazy. That kind of persistence was the bravest thing he'd seen in years. "Tell me about her," he said. "Tell me about oatmeal." Paige's face changed. The defensive tension didn't disappear entirely. It was too deeply ingrained for that. But something softer crept in underneath it. Her eyes dropped to the bag beside her chair, where the lapping sounds had stopped and been replaced by a low, rumbling purr. The sound was barely audible, but Daniel could see the way Paige's whole body relaxed at hearing it, like a knot being loosened. "I found her 2 years ago," she began, her voice steadier now. "Behind my apartment building. There's this alley where the dumpsters are, and I never go back there if I can help it. It smells terrible, and there are always rats. But that night, it was raining, and I heard something. This tiny sound, almost lost in the rain. A cry." She paused, her eyes distant, seeing something that wasn't the restaurant or Daniel or the present moment. "I found a cardboard box, just a regular box, the kind you get when you order something online. It was soaking wet, falling apart. And inside," she trailed off, her jaw tightening. "She was so small. Barely more than a kitten, really, but starving. You could see every rib, every bone in her spine. Her fur was matted and dirty, and she was so scared. When I reached in to pick her up, she scratched me." She held up her left hand, and Daniel could see faint white lines crossing her palm and fingers, old scars that had faded but never quite disappeared. She traced one of them absently with her other hand. "It took me 6 months," she continued, "before she let me touch her without running away. 6 months of leaving food out and sitting perfectly still and pretending I didn't exist, while she watched me from across the room. 6 months of slow, patient work, proving to her that I wasn't going to hurt her, that I wasn't going to leave. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Daniel understood that she wasn't just talking about the cat anymore. "People think I'm crazy," she said, and the bitterness was back in her voice. A single woman, 34, no kids, no husband, obsessed with a stray cat. My mother thinks I'm deflecting from my real problems. My friends think I need therapy. My last date, the one right before you, told me I had attachment issues. She made air quotes with her fingers, her face twisting. Like loving something that needs me is a disorder. Like caring about a living creature that has no one else is some kind of pathology. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm a 34-year-old woman who brings a cat to blind dates. I know how that looks. I know what people think when they see me. But I also know that Oatmeal was alone and scared and dying in a box in the rain. And I couldn't walk away. I couldn't leave her there. And now she depends on me, and I won't let her down just because it's inconvenient or embarrassing or makes men think I'm too much trouble. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. The restaurant hummed around them, couples laughing at nearby tables, glasses clinking, the soft murmur of conversation, and the distant sounds of the kitchen. But at their table, there was only this: 2 people, a cat, and the weight of things finally being said out loud. "My wife passed away 5 years ago," Daniel said. Paige looked up sharply, her eyes meeting his. "Cancer, the fast kind. Rosie, my daughter. She was 2 when it happened, just barely 2. He turned his water glass slowly, watching the light fracture through the crystal. "After Margaret died, I didn't know how to keep going. I didn't know how to wake up in the morning, how to get out of bed, how to eat or sleep or do any of the things that human beings are supposed to do. Everything felt wrong. Everything felt like moving through water, heavy and slow and exhausting." He paused, gathering the words that he had never said to anyone except maybe his sister, late at night, when the grief got too heavy to carry alone. "But Rosie needed me. She was so little, and she had lost her mother, and I was all she had left. So I got up. Every morning, I got up. Not because I wanted to. I never wanted to. But because she needed me to. I made breakfast and packed lunches and drove her to daycare and pretended I was okay, even when I felt like I was dying inside." Paige listened without interrupting. She didn't offer the usual platitudes that people offered when they heard about death. "No, I'm so sorry," or "she's in a better place," or any of the other well-meaning phrases that made Daniel want to scream. She just listened, her eyes steady on his face, giving him the space to say what he needed to say. "People kept telling me to move on," Daniel continued, his voice dropping. "To get back out there, to find someone new. Like Margaret was something I had misplaced. Like I could just go to the store and pick up a replacement wife and everything would be fine." He shook his head. "I couldn't do it. I tried. A few times, in the early years. I went on dates that my sister arranged, like this one. But I always found an excuse to leave. Always found a reason why this person was wrong, or the timing was bad, or I wasn't ready." He looked up at Paige, meeting her eyes directly. "I stopped going on dates because I was tired of pretending, tired of putting on the nice shirt and the polite smile, and acting like I was capable of being what someone else needed. I was tired of hoping and being disappointed. It was easier to just stop." The candle between them flickered, casting shifting shadows across the tablecloth. In the bag beside Paige's chair, Oatmeal purred steadily, a small, constant sound of contentment. "Then why did you come tonight?" Paige asked softly. Daniel smiled, a small, rueful thing that didn't quite reach his eyes. Because my daughter asked me to. She looked at me with those big brown eyes, her mother's eyes, and said, "Daddy, if she's nice, don't run away." And I realized. He stopped, swallowed hard. I realized I've been running for 5 years. From everything. From everyone. And maybe it was time to stop. The couple at the table next to them glanced over, their eyes lingering on the canvas bag at Paige's feet. The woman whispered something to her companion, and they both looked away quickly, but not before Daniel saw the judgment in their faces, the disapproval, the slight curl of the lip that said, without words, "Can you believe she brought that in here?" He saw Paige see it too, watched the way her spine stiffened, the way her hand moved instinctively toward the bag, as if to shield oatmeal from their scorn. The openness that had been building in her face snapped shut like a door slamming. "Maybe we should go," she said, her voice suddenly small. "I'm making a scene. I always make a scene. You're not making a scene." Daniel kept his voice firm but gentle. "You're taking care of something you love. There's nothing wrong with that." But Paige was already reaching for the bag, her movements quick and nervous, the practiced motions of someone who had been in this situation too many times before. "No, really, This was a mistake. I shouldn't have come. I don't know what I was thinking." "Paige." He said her name, and she stopped, looked at him. Her eyes were bright and wet, her chest rising and falling too fast. "You're not too much." She stared at him for a long moment. The restaurant noise faded into the background, the clinking glasses, the murmured conversations, the soft jazz, until there was only the two of them in a bubble of silence. "You don't know me," she whispered. "You don't know how complicated I am, how much work I am. Everyone says they can handle it at first, and then they can't, and then they leave, and I'm alone again with nothing but—" Her voice broke. She gestured vaguely at the bag beside her chair. "Nothing but a cat who barely trusts me. A cat who's the only living thing that actually needs me." Daniel understood that feeling. The exhausting weight of being too much for the world. The way you learn to make yourself smaller, quieter, less demanding, hoping that if you took up less space, people might let you stay. He had done the same thing, in his own way, withdrawing into his house, his workshop, his careful routines, shrinking his life down until it fit inside walls that couldn't hurt him. But walls that kept pain out also kept everything else out. Joy, connection, the messy, terrifying, beautiful possibility of letting someone in. "There's a park 2 blocks from here," he said. "I saw it when I was driving in. Quiet, dark, no one around to judge or stare or whisper." He paused, meeting her eyes. "You, me, and oatmeal. What do you say?" Paige looked at him like he had just spoken in a language she didn't understand. "You want to continue this date? In a park? With my cat?" "Best date I've had in 5 years, Daniel said, and found that he meant it. "I'm not ready for it to end." For a moment, she didn't move. The tension hung in the air between them, fragile and uncertain. Then something shifted in her face, the defensive walls cracking, just slightly, just enough to let a little light through. Something that looked almost like hope. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." They left money on the table and walked out together, Paige carrying Oatmeal's bag against her chest, Daniel falling into step beside her. The night air was cool and clean, carrying the smell of autumn leaves and the promise of rain. The sidewalk was damp from an earlier shower, streetlights reflecting in the puddles like scattered stars. They didn't talk as they walked. But the silence felt different now, not the awkward silence of strangers, but the comfortable quiet of 2 people who had run out of small talk and found they didn't need it. Their footsteps echoed softly on the pavement, matching rhythms without trying. The park was small, just a patch of grass with a few old trees, a playground silent in the darkness, and a single bench beneath a street lamp that cast a pool of yellow light into the gloom. They sat down together, not quite touching, but close enough to feel each other's warmth. Paige opened the bag carefully, and Oatmeal stepped out onto her lap, turning in a circle before settling down. The cat looked better out here, somehow. Less nervous, more peaceful, her green eyes half closed as Paige stroked her fur. "She's beautiful," Daniel said. Paige laughed softly. "She's scraggly and weird and missing half her fur. But thank you. I mean it. There's something about her. She's been through a lot, and she's still here, still trying." Paige was quiet for a moment, her hand moving in slow, steady strokes down Oatmeal's back. "I'm scared," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared that I'll never find someone who accepts all of me. The messy parts, the complicated parts, the parts that come with a sick cat and weird hours and a heart that's been broken too many times to work properly anymore." She turned to look at him, and he could see the fear in her eyes, raw and honest and completely undefended. "I'm scared I'll end up alone, and I'm scared that maybe I deserve to." Daniel felt those words like a punch to the chest, because he knew that fear. He had lived with it for 5 years, letting it dictate every choice, every relationship, every missed opportunity for connection. He had told himself the same lie, that he deserved his loneliness, that it was punishment for some failure he couldn't name, that asking for more was greedy and foolish and dangerous. "After my wife died," he said slowly, "I told myself I would never let anyone in again, because loving someone means you can lose them, and losing Margaret almost destroyed me. I couldn't survive that twice." The street lamp flickered above them, casting strange shadows across the grass. Oatmeal purred steadily, a soft vibration against Paige's legs. "But sitting here with you tonight," Daniel continued, "listening to you talk about Oatmeal, watching you fight for something you love even when it's hard and embarrassing and everyone tells you you're crazy, I realized something." He paused, searching for the right words. "I've been so afraid of losing that I forgot how to live. I've been so busy protecting myself that I forgot what I was protecting myself for." Oatmeal stirred in Paige's lap. She stood up, stretched with that particular grace that only cats have. And then, to Paige's visible shock, she stepped across the small gap between them and settled into Daniel's lap instead. She turned twice, kneaded his thighs with her paws, and curled up against his stomach with a contented sigh. Her eyes closed, and the purring continued, louder now, vibrating against his hands. Paige stared, her mouth open. She never does that. She doesn't trust strangers. She barely trusts me." Daniel looked down at the small, warm weight in his lap. He felt the rumble of her purr through his shirt, the softness of her fur beneath his fingers. This broken little creature who had been abandoned and hurt and learned to fear the world, and she had chosen to trust him. She had walked across the distance between them and decided, for reasons he would never understand, that he was safe. "Maybe she knows something we don't," he said. They sat there in the darkness, the three of them, as the night deepened around them. A light rain began to fall, soft and gentle, barely more than mist. But neither of them moved to leave. Paige leaned back against the bench, her shoulder pressing against Daniel's now, not quite an embrace, but close enough to matter, close enough to feel like a promise. "What happens after tonight?" she asked. Her voice was small, uncertain. "Do we go back to our separate lives and pretend this didn't happen?" Daniel thought about the question. He thought about Rosie, waiting at home with his sister, probably still awake and demanding updates. He thought about his empty house, his woodworking shop, the careful life he had built that kept out pain by keeping out everything else. And he thought about this woman beside him, her wounded heart, her stubborn hope, her fierce love for a broken cat who had no one else. "I don't know what happens next," he said honestly. "I don't know if I'm ready for a relationship. I don't know if I can be what you need or want or deserve." He paused, feeling the weight of his own words. "But I know I don't want tonight to be the end." Paige turned to look at him. The mist had left tiny droplets in her hair, sparkling in the lamplight like scattered diamonds. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, can I see you again? You and Oatmeal?" She laughed, a wet, wonderful sound that was half tears and half joy. "Are you asking me on a second date?" "I'm asking if you'll let me try. No promises, no pressure, no expectations." He reached over, slowly, and took her hand. Her fingers were cold from the night air, but they curled around his like they belonged there. "Just trying. That's all I can offer. Is that enough?" For a long moment, Paige didn't answer. She looked at their joined hands, at the cat sleeping in his lap, at the rain falling soft and silver through the lamplight. And then she smiled. A real smile. The first one Daniel had seen from her all night, and it transformed her face completely. "Yes," she said. "Yes, that's enough." They stayed in the park until the rain grew heavier, and Oatmeal began to shiver in Daniel's lap. Then he walked Paige home, their hands still linked, their conversation flowing easily now that the walls had come down. She told him about her job, her apartment, her dreams of someday opening an animal shelter. He told her about his carpentry, about the satisfaction of creating something solid and real with his hands, about Rosie and her strange wisdom and her teddy bear that had been loved almost to pieces. At her building, they stopped at the door. The rain had plastered Paige's hair to her forehead, and her dress clung damply to her shoulders, but her eyes were bright and alive in a way Daniel suspected they hadn't been in a long time. "Thank you," she said, "for not leaving." "Thank you," he replied, "for bringing the cat." She laughed, shaking her head. "Nobody has ever said that to me before. Then everyone else was missing out." They stood there for a moment longer, the rain falling around them, neither wanting to be the first to let go. Finally, Paige leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Her lips were cold from the rain, but gentle, lingering just a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Paige." He waited until she was inside, until the door had closed behind her, and he saw a light flicker on in a window 3 floors up. Then he walked back to his truck, his clothes soaked, and his heart lighter than it had been in 5 years. The house was dim when he got home, but a single lamp still glowed in the living room. He opened the door quietly, expecting his sister to be dozing on the couch. Instead, he found Rosie, still awake, her teddy bear clutched against her chest, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Daddy!" She scrambled off the couch and launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his waist despite his wet clothes. "You're home! How was it? Was she nice? Did you like her?" Daniel knelt down, gathering his daughter into his arms. She smelled like the lavender soap his sister used, and her hair was tangled from where she'd been lying on the couch. He held her close, feeling her warmth against his rain-chilled skin. "She was nice," he said. "She brought a cat." Rosie's eyes went huge. "A cat? She has a cat? Her name is Oatmeal." "Oatmeal?" Rosie giggled, delighted. "That's the silliest name for a cat I ever heard." "Maybe, but I think it suits her." Rosie pulled back, studying his face with that uncanny perception she had inherited from her mother. Her eyes searched his, looking for something she seemed to find. "Daddy," she said slowly, "did you run away?" Daniel thought about the restaurant, the walk, the park bench in the rain. He thought about oatmeal crossing from Paige's lap to his, about the warmth of Paige's hand in his, about the kiss on his cheek that still seemed to linger. "No, baby," he said. "This time, I didn't run away." Rosie's face split into the biggest smile he had ever seen. She threw her arms around his neck and squeezed so tight he could barely breathe. "I'm so proud of you, Daddy," she whispered into his ear. Daniel held his daughter, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, breathing in the scent of her hair. And for the first time in 5 years, the house didn't feel empty. For the first time since Margaret died, he felt something that might have been hope. 2 weeks passed. Daniel and Paige texted every day, talked on the phone every night, went on 3 more dates that each ended with him not wanting to leave. Coffee at a tiny cafe where no one minded the canvas bag under the table. A walk in the park where oatmeal had first trusted him. Dinner at a quiet Italian place with red-checked tablecloths and candles in wine bottles, and a waiter who snuck scraps of chicken to the cat when he thought no one was looking. Each time, it got easier. Each time, Daniel felt the walls around his heart crack a little more. And each time, Rosie waited up for him, demanding every detail, her teddy bear tucked under her arm and her eyes shining with vicarious joy. But there was still one step he hadn't taken. One introduction he hadn't made. On a Saturday afternoon, Daniel stood in front of Paige's building with Rosie's hand clutched in his. The sun was bright, the air crisp with the promise of winter. Rosie was practically vibrating with excitement, bouncing on her toes, a small catnip mouse clutched in her free hand. "Is this where Oatmeal lives?" she asked, for what must have been the 10th time. "This is where Paige and Oatmeal live," Daniel said. "Remember what we talked about? Be gentle. Move slowly. Let Oatmeal come to you." Rosie nodded solemnly. "I know, Daddy. I'll be so careful. I'll be the most gentle person in the whole world." He took a breath. Then he pressed the buzzer. The door opened, and there was Paige. She was wearing jeans and a soft green sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her eyes went from Daniel to Rosie and back again, and her face did something complicated. Surprise, nervousness, joy, terror, all flickering across her features in rapid succession. "Daniel, I thought we were meeting at the restaurant later." "Change of plans," Daniel said. "I brought someone who really wanted to meet Oatmeal." Rosie stepped out from behind her father, holding up the catnip mouse like an offering. "Hi," she said, suddenly shy. "I'm Rosie. Daddy told me all about Oatmeal. He said she's very brave and very special, and she got sick, but she's better now." "Is she?" "Better, I mean." Paige's eyes grew bright. She crouched down until she was at Rosie's level, and Daniel watched her face soften in a way he'd never seen before. "Hi, Rosie. It's so wonderful to meet you. Your daddy has told me so much about you, too." "He has?" Rosie looked surprised, then pleased. "He has. And yes, Oatmeal is much better now. She's inside. Would you like to come in and meet her?" Rosie looked up at Daniel, waiting for permission. He nodded, and she turned back to Paige with a smile that could have powered a small city. "Yes, please." Paige led them inside. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with books stacked on every surface, plants trailing from shelves, and the soft scent of vanilla from a candle burning on the windowsill. Oatmeal was curled up on a cushion by the window, bathed in afternoon sunlight that turned her gray fur silver. She looked healthier than she had that first night, fuller, calmer, her eyes less wary and more curious. Rosie stopped a few feet away, remembering her instructions. She crouched down slowly, holding out the catnip mouse, her movements careful and deliberate. "Hi, Oatmeal," she whispered. "I brought you a present. It's a mouse. It has catnip in it. Daddy said you'd like it." Oatmeal's ears perked up. She opened one eye, regarded the little girl with the skeptical expression cats reserve for anything new, then slowly stood and stretched. She walked over, sniffed the offered toy, and batted it once with her paw. Then she looked up at Rosie and meowed. "Daddy!" Rosie's voice was pure joy. "She talked to me! She likes me!" Daniel watched his daughter and the cat, his heart so full it hurt. He felt a hand slip into his. Paige, standing beside him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You brought your daughter," she said quietly. "You brought your cat." He squeezed her hand. "Seemed only fair." She laughed, wiping her eyes with her free hand. "Are we really doing this?" "Whatever this is." Daniel looked at the scene before him, Rosie on the floor, Oatmeal cautiously climbing into her lap, sunlight streaming through the windows of an apartment that suddenly felt like it might become important to him. He thought about all the reasons he could still run, all the excuses he could make, all the walls he could rebuild, higher and stronger than before. And then he thought about Rosie's words, spoken in the doorway 2 weeks ago. "Don't run away. I don't know what this is," he said honestly, "but I know I want to find out." In the patch of sunlight on the floor, Rosie looked up with Oatmeal purring contentedly in her lap. "Daddy," she said, "can we keep coming here? Can Oatmeal be my friend?" Daniel looked at Paige. She looked back at him, her eyes asking a question she wasn't quite brave enough to voice. "Can we try? Can we hope? Can we let ourselves want something this good?" "Yeah, baby," Daniel said, not taking his eyes off Paige. "Yeah, I think we can." They spent the afternoon together, the 4 of them. Ordered pizza and ate it on the living room floor, while Rosie tried to teach Oatmeal to fetch the catnip mouse. Watched a movie with Rosie wedged between them on the couch, the cat draped across all their laps like a furry bridge. Talked about nothing and everything, the conversation flowing easy and natural, filling the apartment with laughter and warmth. When it was time to leave, Rosie hugged Paige tight around the waist. "Thank you for letting me meet Oatmeal," she said. "She's the best cat ever, almost as good as my teddy bear." Paige knelt down and hugged her back, her eyes meeting Daniel's over Rosie's shoulder. "Thank you for coming, Rosie. You're welcome here any time, both of you." At the door, Daniel paused. "Thank you," he said to Paige, "for taking a chance, for not giving up." She smiled, that real smile, the one that transformed her whole face. "Thank you for staying, for being the first one who didn't leave." They didn't kiss. It wasn't time for that yet. But Daniel took her hand and held it for a long moment, feeling the warmth of her palm against his, the rightness of this small connection. "I'll call you tonight," he said. "I'll be waiting." Walking to the car, Rosie's hand in his, Daniel felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Not just hope, something bigger than that. Something like possibility, like the future was no longer a thing to be feared, but a place where good things might actually happen. "Daddy?" Rosie said, as he buckled her into her booster seat. "Yeah, baby?" "I like Paige, and I like Oatmeal." She paused, considering. "I think Mommy would like them too." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He reached over and brushed a strand of hair from his daughter's face, his hand trembling slightly. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "I think she would." Some people spend their whole lives apologizing for who they are, for their mess, their baggage, their complications. They shrink themselves down, sand off their edges, tuck away anything that might make someone walk out the door. They learn to expect disappointment. They learn to brace for impact. They learn that hope is a dangerous thing, a weakness, a door left open for pain to walk through. But that night in the restaurant, something changed. A woman stopped apologizing, and a man stopped running. Neither of them knew what the future held. Neither of them could promise forever, or even next month. There would be hard days ahead, days when old fears rose up and whispered that it would be easier to be alone, days when the grief of the past felt heavier than the hope of the future. There would be arguments and misunderstandings, and moments when they would wonder if they had made a mistake. But for the first time in years, they weren't afraid to find out. For the first time in years, they were willing to sit in the mess and the uncertainty and the beautiful, terrifying possibility of love. They were willing to stay, to show up, again and again, even when it was hard, even when it would be easier to leave. Because that's what love is, really. Not perfection. Not the absence of complications. Not two people who have it all figured out. Love is a man who orders warm milk for a stranger's cat. Love is a woman who keeps showing up, keeps hoping, keeps carrying her broken heart into rooms full of people who might reject her. Love is a little girl who tells her father not to run away. Love is a cat who crosses the distance between two strangers and chooses to trust. Sometimes, love doesn't start with fireworks or grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it starts with a cat in a bag and two people brave enough to stay.